Welcome to the Business of Winning podcast, brought to you by Performance Insights, the leading agency with access to the very best talent in motorsport, providing expert speakers, moderators and hosts from the world of Formula One.
Change is hard. Change is scary. As human beings, I think we have a biological fear of the unknown, and we really don't like uncertainty, especially when it's likely to impact us. And so we're always going to be very concerned when there's any kind of change on the horizon. And I think that's where, Formula One actually has a deep, long history of change. Nothing in Formula One ever stays the same. It's, the teams design a brand new car from scratch every single year. We're not making iterations of last year's car. It's like blank sheet of paper stuff. So I'd say if you're looking at change, it's about planning and it's about communication.
I'm Diana Binks, and alongside me is Marc Gallagher. Joining us on today's episode of the Business of Winning podcast series, we are delighted to welcome Nicole Bearne. Nicole began her career in the late 1990s with the British American Racing Formula One team, working alongside world champion Jacques Villeneuve, team principal Craig Pollock and technical director Adrian Reynard. She's continued to work behind the scenes with some of the biggest names in Formula One, and not one to sit still for too long. Nicole is now the founder and director of the Comms Exchange and regularly brings her depth of knowledge and experience on internal communications to audiences around the world. Nicole, welcome. How are you today?
Good, thank you, Diana. Thanks for inviting me to join you on the podcast.
That's great. Really good to have this chance to chat to you, Nicole. And, one of the things that I was reflecting on is you enjoyed a long and successful career at Mercedes Formula One team. And by the way, it's just one part of your career. We're going to talk about lots of other things that you've been up to. But I just thought it would be good for listeners to hear about your final role as head of internal communications during those spectacular seasons from 2014 onwards, when the team was really at its most dominant and most impressive.
Yeah, that was sort of the role that I've done for the last decade or so. Prior to that, as Diana mentioned, I'd had sort of a number of roles which sort of led in the direction of internal communications. I had started out as PA to the team principal. I then moved into the communications team, managed some of the trackside PR elements over a number of years with Jacques and with Jensen Button. I then moved back into an operational role, working across some of the operations of the organisation, finance, IT, and then into a leadership executive assistant role with Ross Brawn and Paddy Lowe on the technical side. And right the way through all of that, the kind of common thread, I think, was that I was looking after the internal communication of the team without it really having that title or having been kind of defined in that way. And so in 2014, the opportunity arose to actually create a brand new function within the team to look after specifically the internal communication and the way that the team communicates with its employees and amongst each of the areas of the team. And so that was sort of the first opportunity really to professionalise that within the team, and also I think within F1. It wasn't something that F1 teams had at that point in time or that they were particularly focused on. So really, as sort of head of internal communications, my role was to act as a business partner to the senior leadership team and also all the various different areas of the team, to support them and to provide them with strategic and tactical advice on how to communicate effectively within the team in order to enhance team performance, to build a strong, cohesive team, and ultimately achieve the organisation's goals, which is to win world championships and to be part of the team that was driving that motivation and that desire to succeed.
You talk very clearly there about the team element, and that's massively important. Formula One is known for being highly complex. It's very much technology-driven sport. Can you talk us through the people factor area and how companies can create a psychological safe environment in which staff are encouraged to engage and speak up and speak out? How do you work that?
Yeah, I mean, psychological safety is a hugely important topic, I think, and has been over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, especially accelerated by the pandemic. But I think within Formula One, it's something that we've been doing for a number of years now. I think that's because it's Formula One is a dangerous sport. Effectively, it's a highly pressured, safety critical environment. The performance of the car and the performance of the team rests very largely on how well the team is able to communicate in times of challenge, in times of pressure. You think there's over 14,000 components on a Formula One car, and every one of those could cause a failure. The cars are travelling at speeds of 225 miles an hour at times, and the drivers are pulling 6.5 G into the corners, and a failure on the car at that speed or in that situation could have tragic consequences. So we've taken a lot of learning from industries such as aviation, where interpersonal communication, decision making and leadership all has this element of being able to constructively raise the inconvenient truths. And it's really important that people are able to speak up, that they feel that they can challenge constructively, that they're able to admit when they have made a mistake, so that these issues are out in the open, that they can be openly discussed, and that we can learn from them.
Nicole, how much have you seen the environment change by putting this into the organisation? What is the response back from key people?
The biggest change that Formula One has undergone over recent years is that teams have grown immeasurably. 20 years ago, a Formula One team would be 350 people, and nowadays they're upwards of 1,200. And that change in the dynamic, the size of the team and the size of the organisation, has created a need to have a different dynamic. And whereas before it might have been slightly more command and control, in that senior designers, senior technical staff would have decided the direction of the car and of the design function, and people would have just got on with it. Potentially, now that the role of the senior leadership has changed to one which is very much more collaborative and very much more in a situation where senior designers and senior technical leaders will empower their teams to very much identify the issues and the problems, and then also empower them to make those solutions and find the solutions that they need.
So, Nicole, you just touched on something that's really fascinating. You've got these large teams, 1,200 or more staff in successful teams like Mercedes or Red Bull Racing. Can we just discuss a little bit about how you achieve alignment across such a large organisation? I mean, it's very difficult to have 1,200 people in a meeting room for a quick chat, for example. So could you maybe summarise some of the techniques that are used to ensure that such a large Formula One team is fully aligned, that everyone has shared values and a common purpose, all of those good things?
The team culture at Mercedes is that the values of the organisation lie very much at the heart of the team's culture, and they drive everyone's behaviours. They have the PRIDE acronym, so passion, respect, innovation, determination, excellence are the values of the team. And they're not just words on a wall, as they tend to be sometimes in other organisations. They are very much woven into touch points and into all elements of the organisation, whether that's, from the moment that we're advertising for a role, through the recruitment process, into performance development reviews. Each person is evaluated on how they demonstrate the behaviours and the values of the organisation. So immediately, even with sort of leadership training programs where we're bringing new managers online, the team is looking at how are these people living the values? Do they understand the values? Do they understand the behaviours of the organisation? And do they have the same cultural reference points that the rest of the team do? So that's really important. And then in terms of the alignment piece, what every team really needs to ensure is that there is a purpose. There is a strategic goal that team or that company is looking to fulfill. And in Formula One, it's a really nice simple one. It's win the World Championship. So it's a relatively straightforward goal. But then how do you translate that into something tangible, something understandable that people can relate to and that they can actually connect with? The way that Mercedes do that is that at the beginning of every year in January, the senior leadership team will take themselves off to a 2-day offsite, and they will formulate a strategic narrative, an intent for the year, in which they will write, a very clear written paragraph that encapsulates exactly what the team needs to do that year in order to fulfill its intent.
Let's talk about Formula One champions now. And you've worked with world champions including Jacques Villeneuve, Jenson Button, Michael Schumacher, Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton. Drivers with 17 world championship titles between them. Was there a common thread joining all of them together in terms of their approach to bring the best in the world? Or did they have any attributes that were basically in common?
Yes, well, they were all very successful drivers, so they definitely had that in common. But they are very different characters on the surface anyway. Looking back through the champions, Lewis is very hardworking and curious, which I think are very great leadership attributes. He always wants to understand how he can improve, how the team can improve. Nico Rosberg is a kind of an engineer. He's quite a deep thinker. He's very analytical. He's kind of quite inward focused a lot of the time. So he would analyse his own reactions to things quite deeply. And then you've got, Michael Schumacher, who was very much, the marginal gains person. He was very driven by the fine details. He wanted to try and make those incremental improvements. But he was also an incredible teammate to have. He was a very kind, thoughtful, caring team member. He would always take time to get to know the people around him, the people who made up his team, and find out things about them and their families and their hobbies, and he would remember it. He would always ask me about my son, because my son was doing some sports, and he would ask me how he was getting on. He would always remember that kind of thing. So I think they all had their own unique characteristics which made them great drivers and great people. They all have this kind of unshakable confidence in their own abilities. Sometimes, that can come across as slight arrogance, but actually it is really that they firmly believe they are the best driver in the world. They also have this ability to immerse themselves in the driving. They get into the flow, as they call it, or the sort of the zone when they're in the car, and just, have this laser focus. They demonstrate that passion and that desire to win.
One of the topics, Nicole, that comes up time and time again in the business community is people's fear of change. Change and transformation is such a big topic, mainly because it's ever present, and lots of industries are going through technological change, regulatory change, social change, environmental change. You have lived through a lot of change during the course of your career. You joined British American Racing in the team's infancy, and for those listeners who know a little bit about Formula One, British American Racing acquired what was the Tyrrell Formula One team's entry into Formula One, so dating all the way back to Jackie Stewart racing in the sport. So British American Racing then evolved into what became the Honda Formula One team. Then when Honda pulled out of Formula One, very much in the wake of the financial crisis, you had Braun Grand Prix for one season, won the championship incredibly under Ross Brawn's leadership, and then into the final incarnation as Mercedes. So what are your personal reflections on living through periods of major organizational change, and perhaps the lessons that we can draw from enduring that and people's natural fear of change?
Yeah, change is hard. Change is scary. As human beings, I think we have a biological fear of the unknown, and we really don't like uncertainty, especially when it's likely to impact us. And so we're always going to be very concerned when there's any kind of change on the horizon. And I think that's where, Formula One actually has quite a as you said, it has a deep, long history of change. Nothing in Formula One ever stays the same. The teams design a brand new car from scratch every single year. We're not making iterations of last year's car. It's like blank sheet of paper stuff. Team at Mercedes used to make a design change. I think they worked out they made a design change to the car every 20 minutes of the day, 7 days a week, throughout the year, apart from the 2 weeks in the summer where you had to shut down. So it's constant change. Even on the wind tunnel model, every time they run the car in the wind tunnel, the model of the car in the wind tunnel, they change around 400 parts on the car in between runs. And then they get to a racetrack and they have to contend with changing weather conditions, track temperatures, safety cars, driver error. The list is endless. It is constant change. It is a complicated challenge to always have readiness to be prepared for change. But I would say that I think there are two key things that you can do to support with change, and one of them is to plan and one of them is to communicate. Within any change programme that we've ever implemented across Formula One, those have been really the two key elements. Communication, I'm biased because I manage the communication side of things, but communication really is about creating that compelling story for the change. We know in Formula One that if we don't change, if we don't evolve, if we don't develop and adapt, we're not going to succeed in the Formula One Championship. So it's about, how do you actually create a story, the narrative that explains why the change is required, why it's necessary. So I'd say if you're looking at change, it's about planning and it's about communication.
And I'm guessing also, Nicole, a strong leadership is key here. And you've worked with two of the greatest Formula One team bosses, with Ross Brawn and Toto Wolff. And they came from very different backgrounds, one an engineer and the other a business entrepreneur. But what made them particularly strong Formula One team leaders, do you think?
As you said, very different backgrounds, very different people. Ross has an engineering brain. He has a very kind of calm, methodical approach, a very pragmatic, analytical mind. He approaches leadership very quietly, thoughtfully, and he's very supportive of those around him, very generous with his time, and also a great leader in terms of bringing the people below him up the ranks. He's very empowering. He will kind of pick talented people and then allow them to do the job. So yeah, really open, honest, great sense of humour, but yeah, sort of a really good teammate to have. Toto, very differently, is very mercurial, very entrepreneurial. He's a visionary. He's a big thinker. He's a disruptor, I suppose, and he likes other disruptors. He likes people who are curious, who ask questions, who challenge the status quo. And he brings those sort of big ideas and the direction to the team. But he's also, again, similarly to Ross, really encouraging of the people around him, very empowering, and really encourages people to be the best that they can possibly be. He's one of these people who's very genuinely interested in other people. If you ever speak to Toto, he will give you 100% of his focus when he's talking to you. And he's genuinely interested in what you have to say, because he will be processing all that information and thinking about what he can do with it. So whilst they're very different characters in the way that they approach it, I think they have that sort of unique interest, curiosity, and the ability to empower people around them, which has made them successful, I think, as leaders in Formula One.
Nicole, let's talk about another topic close to all our hearts, certainly I know to you, and that's diversity. Formula One in general has made improvements in terms of diversity and inclusion. It's something that I reflect on a lot, as I've spent 40 years involved in the sport. But Mercedes has been particularly active in respect of this with the Accelerate 2025 and Mulberry STEM Academy initiatives. So maybe you can explain a little bit about both of those. But could you talk through those programs' objectives and maybe also talk about how diversity and inclusion can really benefit organisations who are truly eager to be best in class?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've done a lot of work on when I was at Mercedes. Formula One, as we all know, has traditionally been sort of very much a predominantly white male sport for many, many decades. And that's, partly because of the way that the sport has portrayed itself, partly because of the way that it has recruited, and also partly because of a sort of an endemic preference within STEM subjects, for example, for men to go and study, boys to study those subjects at school, men to study them at university. So it's going to take a lot to change that, and I think Mercedes have recognised, and most of the other F1 teams now have recognised, that there does need to be more work in that area. A high-performing organisation is generally a diverse organisation. I think there are some really great studies that have shown that. There are studies that have shown that inclusive teams, I think, are like 35% more productive than other teams. Diverse teams make, something like 87% of better decisions. So there's some really solid research that has actually underlined we can't continue to perpetuate a non-inclusive culture. And it's not to say that the Mercedes team or any of the F1 teams are not diverse. Culturally, they're very diverse. I think at one point we counted 27 different nationalities at Mercedes. So with all of the cultural diversity, what we weren't seeing necessarily was gender or ethnic diversity. Again, it's slowly changing. On the sort of non-technical side, in the support functions, the commercial functions, Mercedes, I think, now is up to about 60% female representation in those areas. But it's still only around 9 or 10% or 12% or something on the technical side. So again, it's about how do we encourage more females, more ethnic minority people into more technical and STEM functions. And that's really where the Accelerate 2025, or the Accelerate 25 programme you mentioned, and also the Mulberry STEM Academy and a number of other initiatives have been focused. It's been about how do we encourage people who would not ordinarily consider engineering as a career to think about moving into that field. And a lot of it is about representation. It's about you believe that you can be what you can see. So it's thinking about how we can role model more diversity within the organisation, and then share that with our external audiences.
And Nicole, you've set up the Comms Exchange. Can you tell us about your business, what it offers clients, and the way in which you're applying the lessons that you've learned from Formula One into the wider world of business, for instance?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as you can probably have guessed, I'm quite passionate about internal communication. And so my aim with the Comms Exchange really is to draw on the sort of 25 years of experience that I've had working with high-performing teams and the understanding that I've developed about how to operate in an uncertain and very rapidly changing environment, and see if I can support organisations to apply that in their own companies. And that's through using internal communication, thinking about how we communicate internally, and then also thinking about the employee experience. What is the journey that every employee goes on when they join your organisation? And that's, underpinned by Formula One and also my background in organisational psychology as well. So thinking about the things that we know from organisational psychology research that we know that works. And that's evidence-based, and we can actually apply it into an organisation to just try and establish happy and supported and productive workforces.
So, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really terrific to hear about your career, but your granular insights into what's involved in building and leading a high-performance team in Formula One, such as Mercedes-Benz, and quite frankly, to talk to a woman who's reached a senior executive role in a Formula One team and played such a pivotal role then in shaping the team's behaviours and values and communications internally. So thank you so much for being with us today.
No, thank you for inviting me. It's been great.
Marc, that was just fascinating. She's got so much experience, Nicole, and has seen so many changes and implementations. I mean, what a great advocate for business.
Yeah, and actually really rewarding to talk to someone like Nicole, who isn't going to be hugely known to fans of the sport, unlike a world champion that we might interview on the podcast series. But Nicole's just a good example of a leader within a team who's had a day-to-day, really kind of hands-on role at the sharp end of what it takes to run a Formula One team. I just loved the insights that she gave us. So really fascinating, very authentic, sort of granular detail of what's involved in communicating and aligning a very large team behind a simple goal to state, which is let's go and win the World Championship. Easy to say, but extremely difficult to do. And she gave us some really good insights as to how they went about doing that at Mercedes.
Well, I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too, Marc. And as always, great to chat with you today. The Business of Winning podcast is brought to you by Performance Insights, specialists in matching leading talents from across the Formula One sports industry with corporate events worldwide. Visit www.performanceinsights.co.uk for more details.